Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The living room was dimly lit, bathed in the soft glow of a solitary lamp. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, creating an orchestra of whispers that mirrored the unease stirring within me. Julia sat across from me on the couch, her legs tucked under her, scrolling through her phone. She was engrossed, her fingers darting across the screen with the finesse of someone who had done this countless times before. Her soft chuckles every now and then piqued my curiosity, but I told myself it was nothing. After all, we'd been married for 10 years, trust wasn't something I had ever questioned. Until that night. Julia's phone buzzed again, its vibration breaking the silence like a gunshot. She glanced at the screen, a smile flickering across her lips. She locked it almost immediately, setting its screen down on the couch beside her. That small, seemingly innocuous act sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't like her. Julia was always open with her phone, leaving it on the counter, charging in the kitchen. This secrecy was new, foreign, unsettling. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Oh, just Maggie," she replied, her voice light. "She's asking about the report I need to finish before my trip." Her trip. Another work-related getaway, another weekend of solo parenting for me. Normally, I'd accept it without question, waving her off with a kiss and promises to hold down the fort. But this time, something about her demeanor felt off. "Late night for Maggie," I commented, watching her carefully. Julia didn't meet my eyes. "Yeah, you know how it is with these deadlines." I nodded, feigning agreement. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But the whispers of doubt had started to creep in, a soft murmur that refused to be ignored. The next morning, as Julia packed her suitcase, I lingered in the doorway of our bedroom, sipping coffee and watching her. She folded her clothes with precision, a small smile playing on her lips as she hummed to herself. It was a picture of normalcy, one that should have put my mind at ease. Instead, it left me feeling hollow. "Excited for the trip?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Always," she replied without looking up. "These conferences are exhausting, but it's nice to get out of town for a bit." I nodded, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. "Where is it this time?" "Orlando," she said. "The usual spot. You remember the hotel I stayed at last year?" I did. She had raved about the amenities, the spa, the rooftop bar with its panoramic views. It had sounded like a dream. Now, the thought of it made my stomach churn. "That sounds nice," I said, forcing a smile. "Don't forget to pack your new lingerie." Julia froze, her hands stilling for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Oh, that? It's just for me, you know. A little something to feel good about myself." Her explanation was reasonable, innocent, even. But the way her eyes darted toward her suitcase before meeting mine again told a different story. "I'm sure you'll look amazing," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. She smiled, her usual radiant smile that had once lit up my world. "Thanks, honey." As she zipped up her suitcase and set it by the door, I leaned in to kiss her goodbye. Her lips were warm against mine, but they felt distant, like a memory of something that used to be real. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I found myself alone in the living room, staring at Julia's laptop. She had forgotten it in her rush to leave, a rare oversight for someone so meticulous. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the whispers in my mind growing louder. "Don't do it," I told myself. "Trust her." But trust was a funny thing. It could be built over years and shattered in seconds. I needed to know. I opened the laptop, the screen flickering to life. Her email was the first thing I checked. Most of it was work-related, project updates, meeting invites, mundane exchanges with colleagues. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize, C. Their email started innocently enough. Discussions about pharmaceutical trends, shared frustrations about clients. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. Their words became more personal, laced with inside jokes and veiled compliments. My stomach twisted as I read one particular message. "Can't wait to see you again this weekend. Counting down the hours. See." My hands trembled as I closed the laptop. The whispers were no longer whispers, they were shouts, accusations, confirmations of the betrayal I had hoped wasn't real. I sat back, staring at the dark screen, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. Julia, my wife, my partner, the mother of my children, she was lying to me. And it wasn't just a white lie or a small omission. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than I ever thought possible. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at school, my mind still reeling. I couldn't confront her over the phone, it wasn't the kind of conversation you had through a screen. But I couldn't sit idly by, either. I needed to know the full extent of the lies. When I returned home, I called her office, pretending to be from IT conducting a security check. The receptionist was obliging, pulling up Julia's travel records without hesitation. "Let's see," she said. Her last work trip was 2 months ago, and she's scheduled for one next month. Nothing in between. I felt the ground shift beneath me. 2 months. Not last month. Not this weekend. She wasn't on a work trip. She was with him. My hands clenched into fists as I thanked the receptionist and hung up. The whispers had been right all along. Julia's deception wasn't just a figment of my imagination, it was real, tangible, and staring me in the face. I sat in the quiet of our home, the weight of the truth settling over me. For the first time, I felt the fragile foundation of our life together crack, threatening to crumble under the weight of her betrayal. And I knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same. The house felt emptier than usual as I sat on the couch, staring at Julia's forgotten laptop. The kids were at school, and the quiet amplified my thoughts, making the weight of the betrayal almost suffocating. It wasn't just the emails that haunted me, it was the thought of how meticulously she had constructed her facade, how effortlessly she had lied to my face. I needed to know more. The whispers in my mind were no longer content with fragments of the truth. They demanded the whole story. I opened Julia's laptop again, navigating through her files with the precision of someone seeking answers to life's most pressing questions. Her email had given me a glimpse, but it wasn't enough. I needed undeniable proof. I scoured her browser history, her saved documents, her calendar, anything that could tell me more about this man she was sneaking off to see. And there it was, a folder innocuously labeled Work Docs. Inside were photos, receipts, and itineraries, evidence of trips that didn't align with her supposed work conferences. One receipt stood out, a booking for a luxury hotel in Orlando, dated the weekend she was supposed to be at a pharmaceutical seminar in Chicago. I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat. The confirmation was like a dagger, sharp and unrelenting. She hadn't even bothered to cover her tracks. Or maybe she thought I'd never look. I clicked through the photos, each one more damning than the last. There was Julia, dressed to the nines, sitting across from a man in a sleek suit. His hand rested casually on hers across the table. Another photo showed them by the pool, her head thrown back in laughter as he leaned in close. I slammed the laptop shut, unable to look anymore. My world was crumbling, and I felt powerless to stop it. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey. My mind was a storm of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief. I replayed every moment of our marriage in my head, searching for signs I might have missed. Had she been unhappy for years? Was I so blind that I hadn't noticed the cracks in our foundation? The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of my thoughts. Julia was home. The door opened, and she walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She looked tired but happy, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down. "You're up late." I forced a smile. "Just waiting for you." Her smile faltered slightly, as if sensing something was off. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just missed you." She walked over and kissed me on the cheek, her lips warm against my skin. It felt like a betrayal in itself, a cruel reminder of the intimacy she was sharing with someone else. As she disappeared into the bedroom to change, I stared at her bag, the weight of my discovery pressing down on me. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed more time to figure out how to handle this. The whispers in my mind weren't ready to be silenced. The next morning, Julia left for work as if nothing had happened, her demeanor calm and composed. I watched her go, my heart heavy with the burden of what I knew. Once the kids were off to school, I returned to my investigation. I checked her phone bill next. It didn't take long to find a pattern, long calls and late-night texts to a number I didn't recognize. A quick online search confirmed what I already suspected: it was a VoIP number, likely used to hide the identity of the caller. My blood boiled as I imagined their conversations. I could picture her laughing at his jokes, whispering sweet nothings into the phone while I slept just down the hall. The thought was almost too much to bear. But anger wouldn't solve anything. I needed to stay calm, to plan my next steps carefully. Confrontation without evidence would only give her room to deny, to twist the narrative. I couldn't let that happen. By the time the weekend rolled around, I had pieced together enough of the puzzle to see the picture clearly. Julia's work trips were a carefully constructed lie, a cover for her time with him. Every hotel receipt, every photo, every text message was a thread in the web of deception she had spun. That Saturday, while Julia was out running errands, I called her office. Posing as a potential client, I asked for a meeting with her. The receptionist hesitated before replying. "Julia's not in today," she said. "She's actually on vacation." "Vacation?" I repeated, feigning surprise. "I thought she had a work trip this weekend." There was a pause. "Oh, no, she mentioned taking some personal time. I can leave her a message if you'd like." I hung up without replying, the confirmation hitting me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The audacity was almost impressive. That evening, I sat at the dinner table with the kids, trying to act normal. Sophie chattered about her school project while Max recounted a story from soccer practice. I nodded and smiled, but my mind was elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of Julia and her betrayal. When she walked through the door later that night, her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. She greeted the kids warmly before coming to sit beside me. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone casual. "Busy," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Yours?" "Exhausting," she said with a sigh. "These conferences always take it out of me." I nodded, biting back the words that threatened to spill out. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to confront her with everything I knew. But I held back. This wasn't the time. Instead, I poured myself another drink, the weight of her lies pressing down on me. The whispers in my mind grew louder, demanding action, demanding justice. And I knew that soon, I would have to answer them. Sunday morning dawned quietly, the house bathed in soft light. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee as the kids played in the living room. The tranquility of the moment was a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I had spent the night replaying my discoveries, my mind restless with thoughts of how to confront Julia. I couldn't keep this charade going any longer. The lies, the betrayal, the whispers, they had grown into a cacophony that demanded resolution. Today would be the day. Julia emerged from the bedroom, her hair tied back, still wearing her robe. She greeted the kids with a smile before making her way to the kitchen. "Morning," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Morning," I replied, watching her carefully. She sat across from me, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone. I studied her face, searching for any sign of guilt, but she looked as calm and composed as ever. It made my stomach churn. "Julia," I began, my voice steady. "We need to talk." She looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" I hesitated for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Then I placed her laptop on the table, flipping it open to reveal the folder I had uncovered. "You want to tell me what this is?" Her face went pale as her eyes darted to the screen. She didn't speak, her silence louder than any confession. "Julia," I said again, my voice firmer. "Who is he?" She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she set her coffee cup down. "Eric, I can explain." "Explain." I cut her off, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Explain how you've been lying to me for months. How you've been sneaking off to see him while I stayed here with the kids, trusting you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice cracking. "He's just a friend." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "A friend? That's the best you can come up with? Friends don't book hotel rooms together, Julia. Friends don't send messages like the ones I've seen." She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "How long?" I demanded. "How long have you been seeing him?" She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. 6 months. My chest tightened as the weight of her words sank in. 6 months of lies. 6 months of betrayal. 6 months of watching her walk out the door, thinking she was going to work while she was with him. The kids wandered into the kitchen, their laughter breaking the tension. Julia wiped her eyes quickly, forcing a smile as she turned to them. "Hey, why don't you two go play outside for a bit?" Sophie and Max looked at us curiously but didn't argue. Once they were gone, Julia turned back to me, her composure crumbling. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I was lonely, Eric. You've been so busy with work, and I felt like we were drifting apart." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. "So this is my fault? You're blaming me for your decision to cheat?" "I'm not blaming you," she said quickly. I didn't know how to talk to you. And then he was there, and he listened, and you decided that was worth throwing away our marriage?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You decided that was worth betraying me, betraying our family?" Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You succeeded anyway." We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. Julia wiped her eyes, her breathing uneven. "I want to fix this," she said finally. "I want to make things right." I stared at her, disbelief coursing through me. "You want to fix this? How, Julia? How do you expect me to trust you again after this?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I'll do whatever it takes," she pleaded. "Counseling, therapy, anything. Please, Eric, don't give up on us." I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, the mother of my children, and I felt nothing but anger and betrayal. Her tears, her pleas, they didn't move me. They couldn't undo the damage she had done. "You didn't just betray me, Julia," I said, my voice cold. "You betrayed our family. You betrayed the life we built together. And I don't know if I can ever forgive that." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Julia stayed in the bedroom, leaving me to handle the kids. I tried to act normal, but the weight of our confrontation hung over me like a storm cloud. That night, after the kids were asleep, Julia emerged from the bedroom. She looked defeated, her eyes red from crying. "Eric," she said softly. "I'll stay at my sister's for a few days. Give you some space. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As much as I wanted her gone, the thought of explaining her absence to the kids filled me with dread. She packed a small bag and left without another word. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel like peace. It felt like the beginning of the end. I poured myself a drink and sat in the silence, the echoes of our argument still ringing in my ears. The whispers in my mind were gone, replaced by a deafening certainty: nothing would ever be the same again. The days after Julia left passed in a haze. The kids asked questions I wasn't ready to answer, their innocent faces a constant reminder of the weight of the decisions ahead. I told them their mom was staying with Aunt Megan for a while, framing it as a simple visit. It wasn't entirely a lie, just not the full truth. For now, that was all I could manage. I had spent the better part of the week thinking, strategizing. Her betrayal had cut deep, and while part of me wanted to believe her pleased to make things right, the trust between us was irreparably shattered. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I wouldn't. But then came the letter. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, a plain envelope with no return address. At first, I thought it might be something mundane, a bill or junk mail. But as I opened it, my heart stopped. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in plain text. Eric. You don't know me, but I know about you. I'm the wife of the man your wife's been seeing. We need to talk. The letter included a phone number and a brief note about a nearby coffee shop where she suggested we meet. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my mind racing. His wife. The affair wasn't just my nightmare, it was someone else's reality, too. After debating with myself for the rest of the day, I called her. Her voice was steady, calm, but I could sense the same undercurrent of pain and anger that I felt. We agreed to meet the following evening. The coffee shop was quiet when I arrived. A woman sat in a corner booth, her eyes scanning the room. She was composed, dressed neatly, her posture poised, but there was a heaviness in her gaze that mirrored my own. She spotted me and raised a hand in a tentative wave. Eric, she asked as I approached. I nodded. You must be Claire. We shook hands awkwardly before sitting across from each other. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, she slid a folder across the table. These are screenshots, she said. Messages, emails, photos. I thought you'd want to see them. I opened the folder, and there it was, the evidence of their affair, laid bare. Messages filled with flirtation and promises, photos of them together, receipts for gifts. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to read every word. I'm sorry, Claire said quietly. I know this must be hard to see. It's not your fault, I replied, though the words felt hollow. We talked for hours, sharing stories of deception and pain, filling in the gaps of each other's shattered lives. Claire told me about her husband, Andrew, a corporate consultant with a reputation for charm and a penchant for secrets. Their marriage, like mine, had seemed perfect on the surface. But beneath it lay years of lies. As the conversation drew to a close, Claire leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. I think we should work together. I frowned. What do you mean? Andrew and Julia, she said, her eyes narrowing. They think they've gotten away with this. They think they're in control. But they're not. We can show them what it feels like to lose everything. The plan came together quickly. Claire and I shared everything we had, emails, photos, timelines. Together, we built an airtight case, one that left no room for denial. But we weren't just seeking revenge, we wanted the truth to come to light, to ensure that the people who mattered most, our children, our families, knew the real story. The first step was a family dinner. Julia had called, asking to come over to talk to the kids and me. I agreed, making sure to invite Claire as well. She didn't need much convincing to join. When Julia arrived, she looked hopeful, as though she believed a heartfelt apology might be enough to mend what was broken. She sat across from me at the dining table, her eyes darting nervously between me and Claire. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. I slid the folder across the table. "Why don't you tell us, Julia?" Her face paled as she opened it, her hands trembling. She didn't speak for a long moment, her eyes scanning the evidence. "Eric, I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Start with the truth," Claire said coldly. Julia looked at her, her expression shifting from shock to anger. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Andrew's wife," Claire replied evenly. "The man you've been seeing behind Eric's back. I thought it was time we all met." Julia's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. The silence in the room was deafening. The fallout was swift. Julia broke down, confessing everything in a torrent of tears and apologies. She begged for forgiveness, promising to do whatever it took to make things right. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no undoing the damage. Claire, for her part, was ruthless. She confronted Julia with a calm fury, laying bare every lie, every betrayal. By the end of the evening, Julia was a shell of herself, her composure shattered. As she left the house, I felt a strange sense of closure. The whispers in my mind were silent now, replaced by a quiet determination. This wasn't the ending I had imagined, but it was the one I needed. Months later, life had taken on a new rhythm. The kids and I were adjusting, finding joy in the small moments that made up our days. Julia had moved out permanently, her attempts at reconciliation met with firm boundaries. I had filed for divorce, and the process was moving swiftly. Claire and I stayed in touch, bound by a shared experience that neither of us had wanted but both had survived. One evening, as we sat together at the same coffee shop where we'd first met, she smiled at me, a genuine, warm smile. "It's strange," she said, stirring her coffee. "How something so terrible can lead to something good." I nodded, returning her smile. Strange, but true. In the ashes of betrayal, we had found something unexpected: strength, resilience, and maybe even the beginning of something new.